All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to day 2 of the urinary system lecture. Last time we finished pretty much talking about the gross anatomy of the kidney. So we actually spent some time looking at these external and internal structures, and then we actually took a little break from that and looked at the real thing in a dissection. So today, what I want to do is I want to look close into these medullary pyramids and these renal columns and take a look at the functional structure of a kidney, like what actually allows the kidney to do what it does, which is kind of amazing. So looking closer at the greater function of the kidneys, we're going to look at these little filtering units. So most people know, it's rather common knowledge that your kidneys do indeed filter blood, but how they do that, I think, is quite remarkable. So there are about 1 million of these little filtering units in every single kidney, and little known fact that you could easily survive with just one of your kidneys because these things are so efficient. So that's where we're going to move. So these little functional units. So there are these little functional units you can see here in the picture, and they're actually referred to as nephrons. I have this running joke with students that you can remember them as like Zach Nephron. This is a photo of a nephron right here. And a nephron is made up of two primary components, as you can see in this picture. You can see there's a lot of blood vessels, but then there's also this, it almost looks like this yellow tube. So that tube is the first thing I want to talk about. That tube is called the renal tubule. And the renal tubule is essentially just a waste pipe. So I'm going to make the analogy in a second that if we're looking at, remember you have a million of these right here that you're seeing in each kidney. So you have about 2 million total. And what I want you guys to envision is waste coming in to this nephron, and then the waste is entering. Think of this thing almost like a toilet bowl. The waste enters the toilet bowl, and then it goes down this pipe. And you'll notice there's capillaries surrounding it too, which that just kind of came up. And those are called peritubular capillaries, which makes sense because the prefix peri means surrounding. So those are for blood supply, and that's to reclaim stuff, but we're not going to get to all of that today. I'm going to save that for the next time we sit down. Today, I really want to just talk about the anatomy of the nephron. So let's jump into that. Actually, before we jump into the specific anatomy of the nephron, I do want to talk about the two types of nephrons. So you have two types of nephrons. You'll notice that they're actually labeled for where they're located. You'll notice they look very similar, even though the tubes look a little bit different. Some of them will look a little bit more confusing and wrapped around each other than others. But that's not what gives them their name. They're named for where they're found. So this first one right here is actually different than this one right here in that if you look at the kidney itself, right, this first one is found only in that outer region. From here to here, right, that would be the renal cortex, remember. And that means that from here to here would be the renal medulla, and then this would be the pelvis, right down here, the renal pelvis. So any nephron that's found only in the cortex layer of the kidney is referred to as a cortical nephron for that reason. That one makes pretty good sense. This next one is a little bit longer term, but it is something that makes total sense as well. This type of nephron is called a juxtamedullary nephron, and that's because it's juxtaposed, or it's actually between two different places at one time. If you're a photographer, you probably know what it means to get a juxtaposed shot of something. Where you have a long exposure and you have someone run in front of the camera and you see the trail of someone because they're in two places at once. That's kind of why the nephron is named this. The juxtamedullary, it's like between. Juxta means between the medullary region and the cortical region. So that's a juxtamedullary nephron. So how is it that nephrons actually clean blood? I actually found this picture online and I thought it was really, really creative. There's this little anatomical drawing artist. It's called the Comical Anatomist, which I thought was pretty interesting. And this is just fantastic. Like, explains how the nephron works. I'm going to recommend that maybe you come back and take a look at this picture after we're done talking, because the picture will make a heck of a lot more sense than it will now. But essentially what a nephron does is what a dialysis machine does, is it is what removes the waste products from your blood. So let's talk about how it does that by talking about the main structures. So I have, I'm going to divide up our nephron in this picture into the two parts that I've already discussed, right? The pipe, and the pipe, the first part of the pipe is actually going to be our toilet bowl in our analogy, and then we're just going to go down this really long pipe. And that is essentially, just remember, a waste pipe. So in this picture, we're going to look at one of two things. We're going to look at the waste pipe that carries the waste away from the blood, and then we're going to look at the bloodstream. So I think that's the best way to differentiate between the two. So the first thing I want to talk about is, remember, the renal tubule is just this cream-colored portion, but we are going to zoom in here on our toilet bowl thing, and that is our first structure. That first structure is called the Bowman's capsule. It's the case. All right, so I'm actually just labeling it with the letters here, but you can see in our key over here what these things mean. So this case is analogous to our toilet bowl, right? So if waste is coming into our toilet bowl, it's going to get collected in our Bowman's capsule, and then it's going to get flushed down this pipe. So the first part of the pipe, you'll notice if we look over here at this zoomed out image, there's like three main sections of the pipe there, and it's really confusing, and it wraps all over the place, and it goes under and over, and it's just like a maze, right? So this pipe, you'll notice, goes up here, and then it comes around, and then it comes and goes underneath that little piece of pipe there, and it comes all the way down, and then so that whole part that I just outlined with my mouse here, that is called the proximal convoluted tubule. I know it's a really, really long three-part word here, but the term actually does make sense. You might remember from first unit of this class, the word proximal means near or close, and the word convoluted actually just means confusing. You've probably heard that term used before, just in common language. You know, if someone tells you a story, and you know, someone may have told you a story that's really confusing, and you may have heard the term, wow, that story was super convoluted and all over the place, right? So it is like a confusing thing. And looking at that pipe, it is definitely confusing. Like I said, it goes all over the place. There's no rhyme or reason to how it's folding and wrapping and so on and so forth. So it's like a crazy water slide that zigs and zags all over the place. So the word proximal convoluted tubule, well, tubule just means tube, so that's pretty easy. But proximal and convoluted just means that it's a confusing tube that's near something. And what is it near? Well, it's near our toilet bowl, our Bowman's capsule. That's the reason it gets the term PCT. It's the part of our tube that's near the Bowman's capsule. So now, as we continue going down, though, you're going to notice that there's this hairpin loop right at the bottom, and that loop has a special name, just named for the scientist that discovered its functionality, and that is called the loop of Henle, 1C, the loop of Henle. And it's given a special name because we found out that there is something special that happens there that doesn't happen in the other parts of our pipe. So we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. And then the next portion is still kind of a confusing long tube. So you'll notice we got the convoluted and we got tubule again. But because this one's far away from our toilet bowl Bowman's capsule, we say that it's distal. Remember, the word distal means distant. So this last portion of our pipe is called the distal convoluted tubule because it's far away from our Bowman's capsule. And then the last little portion of our pipe is actually a shared pipe. So this shared pipe is our collecting duct. And you're going to notice there's actually, it almost looks like branches that have been broken off here, but that's because this picture is incomplete. In this image, you're actually going to have more than one nephron sharing a collecting duct. So even though this image shows only a single nephron with one Bowman's capsule and one big, long, confusing tube, this branch, this branch, this branch, this branch, and this branch, so there'd be 5 additional nephrons all connecting to this singular, bigger pipe. You can almost make the analogy, right? If we're going to say that this is a toilet bowl, right, we could say that, you know, this is a toilet in your home, and maybe across the street your neighbor has a toilet in their home, and then maybe their next door neighbor has a toilet in their home, and their next door neighbor has a toilet in their home, and when you all flush the toilet, it all goes to one big, like, I don't know, it's about I think it's a little less than a foot wide out into the street, right? All of the sewage connects to one big pipe outside your home. In the street, that is what the collecting duct is analogous to in this example. So a collecting duct is a shared tube for a whole bunch of different nephrons. All right, and these collecting ducts actually are going to be where the renal that's the collecting ducts are where the renal the pyramids are. So pyramids are just a whole bunch of collecting ducts all spilling waste that are going to go down into the calyces, the renal calyces, into the pelvis. So these are going to be dripping little drops of urine into the renal pelvis so that you could drop them down into your bladder and store it for later. So that's all the pipe. Pretty easy, I think, right? Bowman's capsule, toilet bowl, and then it goes down this long pipe that actually has 3 different parts, and then it all ends in one big shared, much bigger tube or pipe called the collecting duct, right? And that makes sense because that's where the urine is all being collected from the different nephrons. Now, blood vessels, there are different blood vessels as well. So I'm going to talk about this first one. So remember, since we're cleaning the urine, we have to be bringing in dirty blood. And remember, when we say dirty, we sort of use that word loosely because only 1% of what's coming in is actually considered waste product. So we do have to get rid of that 1% waste though and send it down this tube, right? So this is how we do it. You'll notice that there are different sized blood vessels coming into the toilet bowl and leaving the toilet bowl. Now, some people make the mistake in thinking that the change in size is because you got rid of all this waste, but remember, only 1% of the blood that's coming in is waste, and this is definitely smaller. This size blood vessel right here has decreased way more than 1% compared to this one. So the reason this blood vessel actually gets a lot smaller is to build up pressure. I mean, imagine taking your thumb and putting it over the end of a hose, right? Think about all of the pressure that's going to build up in that hose, because you're making the end smaller. So that's what's happening here. You're sending in dirty blood, and then by making this blood vessel much narrower, all this pressure builds up and it pushes the waste out into the toilet bowl. But you don't want to push out everything. So are these specialized cells that actually are going to act as filters, like little sieves that are going to, anything that's small enough to fit through will get pushed through. So let's talk about some of these structures now. I just wanted to explain how that's going to work. So the structure coming in is called the afferent arteriole, the afferent. And I always tell people to remember afferent arrives at the toilet bowl, all right? A arrives, afferent arrives. Now, on the other hand, we're also going to have clean blood, hopefully, leaving their toilet bowl because we got rid of most of the waste, right? And it went down the proximal convoluted tubule here. So this is called the efferent arteriole. But before we do that, I do want to talk about this ball of capillaries. These capillaries are where all the action happens, right? Where all the waste gets pushed out. So we have a lot of surface area. We cover it all with these really cool podocytes. So this ball of capillaries has a special name, and it's called the glomerulus. And as I just said, these yellow-looking things that you see in the picture, those are called podocytes. Podocytes literally means foot cells. I don't really understand the meaning of that because they don't look like feet to me. I mean, maybe these kind of look like little toes, but remember, these foot cells are just filtering cells. Their job is, as waste gets pushed through, because you might remember from histology that capillaries are just simple squamous epithelium, so they're really, really flat, and it's easy to push things through that. But it's got to pass through these filters first. So anything that's too big won't pass through the filters. So blood cells, for instance, are going to be too big. You shouldn't have blood ending up in your urine. If you do, then you probably have something wrong that's happening at these podocytes, something maybe called glomerulonephritis, where some of these podocytes actually get torn off and blood passes when it's not supposed to. You could have a whole bunch of other issues too, kidney stones and so on and so forth, and we'll talk about that later. But so that's the glomerulus. We're going to filter the waste out at the glomerulus and with the podocytes, and then clean blood is going to come back this way, right? I just pointed out the podocytes, by the way, but clean blood is going to come back through our efferent arteriole. So I always remember that the efferent exits, right? They both start with E, and that the afferent arrives. Afferent arrives, efferent exits. And then lastly, you'll notice, let me go back to the zoomed out picture here. So we got our afferent arriving, all right? We don't see podocytes in this picture, but it's going to squeeze out a bunch of material, and then we're going to exit, and then you'll notice after it exits, we form much narrower capillary beds again, and it's completely wrapping around this convoluted tubule, this really long, confusing looking pipe. And these are called the paratubular capillaries. Again, paratubular means surrounding or around the tube. So they're surrounding the tube because actually, as it turns out, in this first step, you got rid of a little bit too much. And so they're going to try to reclaim back some stuff and secrete some stuff that didn't go out the first time. And we're not going to talk about that today, but we'll get into the discussion of these paratubular capillaries because they're clearly surrounding the pipe for a reason. So the only thing I wanted to end with, there we go, paratubular capillaries. The only thing that I wanted to end with then is a little bit of review of what we just talked about. So I wanted to start by looking at blood flow through the kidney. So remember, we just separated them between blood and waste flow. So the one thing that we didn't talk about is how is the blood getting to the kidney in the first place? You might remember this from the last time we met, and that was through the renal artery. So I do want you to know that the renal artery is bringing blood into the kidney. You don't see that in this picture, remember, because this is a nephron zoomed way in the actual kidney tissue. But renal artery brings it into the kidney itself, right at the renal hilus. Remember that indent that's in the side of the kidney. And then once we're there, I'm just going to write down that you got a bunch of other intermediate arteries and arterioles that we don't care about. I'm not going to have you know those, but I do want you to know what we talked about today. I want you to know that in order to get cleaned, you got to come up through this afferent arteriole, all right? And once you're through the afferent arteriole, you're going to end up in this ball of capillaries. I hope you're trying to think through this in your head before I give you the answers. This ball of capillaries is called the glomerulus. You'll notice I made it purple here because it's going to start to some of the oxygen is going to start leaving in the glomerulus, so the blood is going to start to change color. Not entirely, though. So in most textbook diagrams, they show that once it leaves the glomerulus, there's still some oxygen left. So I'm going to go back red here. But we got glomerulus, and remember, exits is the efferent arteriole. All right, okay. I just made this one purple just so you can see that there's some exchange of oxygen here. Some oxygen is leaving, but it's not completely deoxygenated yet. That's going to happen when we start wrapping around the tubes and the rest of the oxygen is taken away, and that's in the paratubular capillaries. Now, there's a whole, after the paratubular capillaries, all the oxygen's been depleted, so we're going to start turning blue. And then we're going to have to go up, back to the heart and stuff like that. But there's another bunch of intermediate venules and veins that we don't care about again. And then finally, we're going to leave the kidney. If we entered the kidney through the renal artery, we very much leave the kidney through the renal vein. So hopefully that was a little bit of review because we saw that in the picture, and then review from the kidney dissection and from the previous day of lecture. So that was how blood flow moves through a kidney and through the nephrons. But what about waste flow? So remember, waste doesn't begin to flow until our toilet bowl. So the first structure that I want you to know about is the Bowman's capsule. So our Bowman's capsule starts to collect waste, and then we send it down the pipe. Remember, there are three sections of the pipe. There is the near portion of the pipe, the proximal convoluted tubule, or PCT, and then as we wrap all the way down, we get to this little loop, that's the loop of Henle. And then finally, we're much more distant now, and this is the DCT. So once we're done with the DCT, remember, all of these nephrons are going to start collecting, kind of, remember, analogous to the street on the collecting duct. And then I know you're thinking right there, well, there's nothing else in the picture, but where is this collecting duct going to again? Remember, that collecting duct is actually making little drops of urine that are going to form in the renal pelvis. But you might recall that the renal pelvis is actually the first little portion of the renal pelvis. Those little bays are called calyces, those little renal calyces. And then we're spilling into the normal renal pelvis. That pelvis is connected to the ureter, as you might recall. And then finally, that ureter spills down into the urinary bladder. And once that urinary bladder is filled up, then once that urinary bladder is filled up, then you are all set to empty that into the actual toilet. And that, folks, is actually going to be it for the lecture for today.